the invention of Captain America in 1940. One of the most popular of the original costumed superheroes, he would be awarded his own comic book in 1968, and in that first extended story, it is here that Captain America faces his arch nemesis, the Red Skull, once more. And in this adventure, the Red Skull has put together a team that he calls the Exiles. And we can see very clearly that these characters are meant to represent the international fascists of the 1930s. Counters a monolith that he finds can communicate to him by writing flaming letters upon its surface, which of course is familiar to us in two ways, of course as a biblical story in the flaming letters, and as well as the very famous monolith from the film 2001. And of course, so this is the vehicle that begins the story in our first issue, where the prophecy is given by the source. Boy, that sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? But moving on to the incredible Emma Peel herself, one of the greatest television characters of all time. I actually did pick up on this show with the fourth season, and I don't think I saw all of them, but I did see a bunch of the black and white season, and it is absolutely one of the greatest shows of all time, and what an incredible character. So how Sikowski connected this series into Wonder Woman is he made Wonder Woman lose all of her magic powers. And so she didn't actually lose her connection to the magic land of her mother, but she loses her super strength. And so what she does, she actually finds herself a martial arts instructor, and she falls under the tutelage of a Chinese martial artist by the name of I Ching.
Well, the characters represent a transcendent feeling that we all have inside us, that we could do better. We want to do better.
The legendary comic book artist Jack Kirby and his longtime collaborator Joe Simon took the fledgling comic book industry by storm with the invention of Captain America in 1940. One of the most popular of the original costumed superheroes of the 1940s, he would continue to be published into the 1950s well after Simon and Kirby had moved on to DC and other things, but as superhero comic books fell out of popularity in the 1950s, he would stop being published and would not have been an iconic character. I mean, I like Dr. Fate and everything, but I wouldn't call him an iconic character. It was only when Jack Kirby returned to what would become Marvel Comics, where he would invent a whole bunch of new characters and then put them together in a group, and in Avengers #4, he would reintroduce Captain America. And after some success and eventually getting a series going in the back of Tales of Suspense, he would be awarded his own comic book in 1968. And in that first extended story, it is here that Captain America faces his arch nemesis, the Red Skull, once more. And in this adventure, the Red Skull has put together a team that he calls the Exiles. And we can see very clearly that these characters are meant to represent the international fascists of the 1930s. And this right here is where Captain America became iconic. And we can look through this group of international fascists and we can identify Mussolini, we can see Franco, we can see Mao and or Tojo, we can see, what is this, Rasputin as Stalin perhaps? Anyway, puzzled about the old guy in the wheelchair. Anybody got any ideas on that one? But clearly what we see here is the ruling class of apocalypse that Kirby was going to put together in his mind over the next 2 years. You can see it is absolutely central to his work of trying to express the importance of being ever vigilant for fascism. That was the overarching theme of his great Fourth World project, including the New Gods, which got pulled out from under him. And something that absolutely does not get enough attention is the degree to which an entire generation of filmmakers grew up on Jack Kirby comic books, and his influences are very visible in all of these very popular movie franchises that are still alive and well today, and Kirby is long forgotten as far as Hollywood is concerned. But we can correct this terrible oversight now, and let's have a look together as we go through the many, many direct references to Jack Kirby comic books that we can find in some of the most popular science fiction films of the 1980s. Now, even I will be the first to admit that Darth Vader's entrance at the beginning of the film Star Wars is one of the greatest villain entrances in film history, even though I wouldn't see it for quite a few years later. While the electric tension between Luke Skywalker and his nemesis, Darth Vader, is one of the most riveting in science fiction adventure. And the jaw-dropping reveal at the height of their battle that Darth Vader is in fact Luke's father is one of the greatest cliffhanger endings in any trilogy's history. But of course, fans of 1970s comics were very familiar with this particular plot because we had already seen it in Jack Kirby's incredible, groundbreaking New Gods series, which was a series that was about the incredible conflict between Orion and Darkseid. Now, this story was really made more interesting in the 7th issue, which introduced an entire backstory about an incredible war that had gone on previously. And what we find here is that Kirby is continuing the mythology of Ragnarok from his earlier Thor series of Marvel Comics. And like in the story, new gods spring up out of the destruction. And here he's making a distinction between two realms, that of the ecologically perfect planet with the floating high-tech city of New Genesis and the evil industrial hell world known as Apocalypse. So they enter into this terrible super technological war that takes place that destroys both of their planets. And in the heat of this war, in the midst of this destruction, the leader of the army of New Genesis, Isaiah, wanders out into the desert and encounters a monolith that he finds can communicate to him by writing flaming letters upon its surface, which of course is familiar to us in two ways, of course as a biblical story of the flaming letters, and as well as the very famous monolith from the film 2001. And of course, so this is the vehicle that begins the story in our first issue, where the prophecy that is given by the source, boy, that sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it, is what motivates Orion go and find that humans from Earth have been captured by Darkseid and his quest to discover the anti-life equation, which is of course the complete control of the minds of all people everywhere, the ultimate aspiration for the ultimate god of fascism. But it was not finished, and it did not leave any clues for a young George Lucas as to how to end his story, but that's another story. And it is here where we see there is an exchange of sons, the son of the, what we could call the ruler of heaven, and the son of the ruler of hell are exchanged. And what this does is this creates an incredibly balanced image that is very much like the Chinese ancient Taoist symbol of the yin and yang, wherein there is a dot of darkness within the light and a dot of light within the darkness. Really, it is a fabulous image and a very balanced idea. And I think this could have become a problem for the Disney Star Wars sequel as they tried to shoehorn kind of a yin-yang structure into a very different plot by this point. And this is where we get this problem of the burnout Luke, which is kind of puzzling. Well, why did they have to throw Luke under the bus? Because when we look at Kirby's original story, the dark side of the story is represented by the hero Orion, who is a warrior first, last, and always, and who fully gives in to the rage of war, to the point where at a certain important conflict, the actual monster that he is fighting laughs and calls Orion the monster. And this clearly isn't meant to be Luke. And so we have to look to Kirby's story, where there's another fascinating backstory element where he introduces the mentor of young Scott Free, who will become Mr. Miracle.
Never believe your own publicity. Scott? Scott!
O ye of little faith.
Scott!
And that is the visionary Himon. And Himon is kind of a cross between a scientific genius and a spiritual genius. And he's the one who creates the mystical computer technology that is the mother box, that is somehow connected to the source. And this is a technology that anybody can create themselves with enough guidance, and he spends his time in Apocalypse making amends for laying the groundwork for the technology that would create their war. And in this story, of course, as he keeps trying to teach people this, he keeps getting betrayed, and he gets murdered over and over again. And we see a very similar idea in his Captain Victory series, where we find that Captain Victory is given a wardrobe of 400 cloned bodies that he can dip into every time he dies in battle. And it could be this very finite number of 400 that is the reason why Himon is actually murdered by Darkseid at the end of the Hunger Dogs series, but I'm just speculating. Now, I bring this up so that we might refer to my beloved copy of Harvey Comics' reprint of the 1950s Joe Simon and Jack Kirby Fighting American series, which is really visually interesting. It's a real more tongue-in-cheek approach than they'd done before, but really the top of their game work as far as visuals. This is interesting because it is the weirdest origin story of all time. And the premise here is a story with two brothers, one a big brawny military hero who has been killed, the other a little scrawny Poindexter kind of guy who gets hit by the military to get involved in an incredibly edgy new experiment wherein his brother's body will be modified to become superhumanly powerful, and then his mind will then be electronically transferred into that formerly dead body of his brother, and then he will become a really strong fighting American soldier guy. But anyway, strange concept, but we can see also that Kirby played with this idea over decades, and it is deep in the fabric of all of his ideas in the background, if not in the foreground. Another super important influence on Star Trek is an incredibly little known but great 3-issue series by Howie Chaykin, Iron Wolf, that appeared in the last 3 issues of Weird Worlds for DC Comics, which had been an anthology dealing with the Edgar Rice Burroughs properties that they had acquired when Joe Kubert did his run on Tarzan, which was very interesting but not terribly successful. This series, however, was absolutely brilliant, but because the series was cancelled, Howie Chaykin lost control of this very potentially great series, and he would kind of return to the character in his own way with Cody Starbuck, but this series really had an edge that really we didn't see again. But it has some really great ideas. It has a great science fiction adventure series that's a very kind of a psychedelic Flash Gordon, where we have some really great ideas like anti-gravity wood and the great ship, the Limerick Rake, and this evil empire in this case is run by vampires, and the lead vampire even wears a real Dracula cloak and everything. And just in case you're thinking it's a shot in the dark here, I'm making it really quite clear that this did influence George Lucas, because when Marvel Comics did acquire the rights to publish Star Wars comics, George Lucas specifically asked for Howie Chaykin to be the artist, and that was a very big boost to his career at that point, because he'd been pretty badly treated by the industry by that point, so that was definitely a bit of a feather in his cap, and you have to be grateful to George Lucas for that much at least. But by far and away, the most obscure inspiration for the character of Darth Vader comes from one of my favorite super obscure series, and that is Mike Sekowsky's revamping of the Wonder Woman series in the 70s. And of course, he had already done this with Metal Men, and this is really an incredibly interesting run. Still my favorite version of the Metal Men. But before we talk about the Wonder Woman series by Mike Sekowsky, we have to go back another step and talk about the very famous television series that inspired it in the first place. The smash hit spy series from the UK, The Avengers. Or as I used to say on A&E, The Avengers. One of the coolest 60s TV shows, and it really took off in its fourth season when Diana Rigg joined the show. Now, she was replacing another woman, Honor Blackman. And Honor Blackman is most famous for what she did after this television show. She would become one of the most famous Bond girls in the third James Bond film, and perhaps the biggest blockbuster of them all, Goldfinger. And of course, she had the incredibly hilarious name of Pussy Galore. But there is a very funny story about how she got what became an iconic black leather outfit. So it turns out that Honor Blackman was the second co-star with Patrick Macnee, the first being a male. And so it was two hard-boiled kind of investigators in the first season. And so the show was reasonably successful, so they'd already planned a second season when the other actor quit at the end of the season and they had to replace him. And so they got the clever idea, why don't we replace him with a woman character? And so they decided to do that. But the thing was, they'd already written a bunch of the scripts. And so she just walked into the character of a male character and started doing the fight scenes. And so how that evolved was during a very vigorous fight scene, her pants split on camera, and they decided, oh, we're going to have to make something a little more durable. And that is how the black leather suit began. And of course, Diana Rigg would continue with a much more stylish flair, and that would become something that would become very influential in America just a little bit later with, of course, the lovely Julie Newmar's portrayal of Catwoman, and, well, Eartha Kitt's as well. Now, this situation also precipitated one of the most meta jokes in all of 1960 television, and this is a scene where, reading through some Christmas cards, John Steed receives some season's greetings from his former partner. And of course, this reference, if you are familiar with the plot of Goldfinger, is really kind of funny.
Best wishes for the future, Kathy. Mrs. Gale, oh, how nice of her to remember me. What can she be doing in Fort Knox?
But moving on to the incredible Emma Peel herself, one of the greatest television characters of all time. I actually did pick up on this show with the fourth season, and I don't think I saw all of them, but I did see a bunch of the black and white season, and it is absolutely one of the greatest shows of all time, and what an incredible character. The character of Emma Peel is a very dynamic one, and she is like the heavy compared to Steed, who is the urbane gentleman. But he is much more accomplished at spycraft, so he still is the mentor, despite her being the muscle in this situation.
That was very, very dirty.
You're quite right. But I didn't promise to fight fair.
So how Sekowsky connected this series into Wonder Woman is he made Wonder Woman lose all of her magic powers. And so she didn't actually lose her connection to the magic land of her mother, but she loses her super strength. And so what she does, she actually finds herself a martial arts instructor, and she falls under the tutelage of a Chinese martial artist by the name of I Ching. And apparently that really did embarrass the writer later on, but yeah, that's a street name, it would be fine. And this turned out to be a really well-rounded adventure series
Mrs. Peel, you're remarkable.
With diverse adventure ranging from espionage to the supernatural. It was quite an interesting series, but it also had one of just the most interesting female characters of all time, if not the actual first woman action hero. She was certainly the most stylish and best remembered. And of course, it's still, when we look back at these days, I mean, nowadays, oh, being cornered by three guys, give me a break. Also, there was a really incredible fashion element to the series. This actually was coordinated with a really big fashion designer, so it has a really incredible visual look as well that Sikowski did incorporate, and just some really stylish looks. It's a super graphic thing to start with, and what Sikowski used a very iconic white look, and Emma did actually have some really great white design costumes as well, so it really did fit in, and there are some really incredible science fiction episodes, which of course are what really stood out in my mind, and of course the house that Jack built was really just one of the most incredibly riveting bits of television I saw as a young person. A computerized house that is trying to drive her mad as it slowly kills her.
The object of the exercise is to drive me insane. How will you know when you've achieved it? What on earth do you think you're doing?
And, well, there were some other pretty risque bits as well, but you can see how this actually just lent itself really well to be able to do some really cool fantasy stuff with the series as well. But what the heck does any of this have to do with the development of the character of Darth Vader, you're asking yourself? Well, here we have to focus in on one story in particular from this great series, with a great start off with the mentor being shot down in the street by a hit squad. But then, as the story progresses and Diana subdues the assailants, she finds that the leader of the hit squad has a very peculiar necklace. Diana's mentor realizes that he has a very similar, in fact, matching piece on his own necklace, and this proves her to be his own lost daughter. But she then takes them back to meet her employer, who turns out to be Diana's very own nemesis, Dr. Cyber. And of course, she's already struggled with Dr. Cyber, and so this is a reunion, and it looks like this time Dr. Cyber has really got the drop on them. But in the course of an incredible battle, one of Dr. Cyber's henchmen, though not immobilized in his last death gasps, fires off a barrage of bullets from his machine gun, knocking over the brazier of burning hot coals right next to Dr. Cyber, striking her full in the face. Though fortunately, Dr. Cyber is rescued by the fanatical dedication of I Ching's daughter, who helps her escape before they can be captured. And of course, like all good supervillains, very badly scarred Dr. Cyber would return, even more driven to revenge. And this is actually a second time Sikowski used a Phantom of the Opera theme. There's another one in the Metal Men series that he did at the same time. Be that as it may, we end up in the same situation where Diana Prince is captured once again, and in this situation she manages to break free of the very bindings that are holding her. And Diana, swinging her chains like a weapon, strikes Dr. Cyber, knocking her right off of her feet, who would then fall into the very poorly insulated power supply of her control panel, which then would electrocute her, then sending arcs of power into other explosive areas of the compound. We get the classic explosive destruction of another supervillain laboratory. And of course, this would not be the end of the nefarious Dr. Cyber. She would return even after Mike Sikowski himself would leave the series. And as we see here with this really lovely cover by Jeff Jones, the series continues with Denny O'Neil still writing and inker Dick Giordano taking over the full art chores. And here in the final form of Dr. Cyber, we see the incredible mask designed by Dick Giordano that appears only this one time in this one comic book. And it is clearly very influential on the mask of Darth Vader. And of course, if we reminisce about the very dramatic path that Dr. Cyber has taken, this of course is very similar to what becomes the origin of the dreaded Darth Vader. This character would then presumably die in this episode as she was taken down with the classic judo throw, falling on the knife she was attacking Diana with. And although this series would continue only a couple of more issues, there was a great appearance of the Catwoman and crossover with the Sword and Sorcery series, which was also getting cancelled at the exact same time, but there was some really great stuff while it lasted. But the Avengers TV series was, first of all, just a really cool science fiction series. It had some very cool science fiction ideas. One of the most famous and influential is the house that Jack built, where Emma is facing a computerized house that is trying to drive her mad as it slowly kills her. This influenced Jack Kirby. He took a lot of Fantastic Four stories were based on TV series at the time. In this story, we have the Fantastic Four go rent a house in the suburbs. It's a very high-tech new house, and it turns out to be a broadcasting center for the Mole Man, who's got a new weapon that will blind everyone on Earth. The other great story that even had a sequel is, of course, the Cybernaut episode, and this was absolutely very clearly an inspiration for the Terminator films. This is like you watch the very first black and white episode of this. It's very menacing. It's a very interesting idea. The color one is a little bit funnier, but there's still a great robot fight in it, so you can't complain.
He's had some kind of nervous breakdown.
You've made a mistake. You've told me what to expect.
So we can see that Darth Vader has a whole lot of different elements that all blended together to make this character. And it was an overview of all the really exciting things that were going on in comics in the early 70s. And all of these things got canceled. These things all disappeared. Nothing followed through. So in a way, they're really immortalized by these filmmakers that have pulled out all these ideas and made them very well remembered. But a little credit where credit is due wouldn't hurt either, would it?
Automation to the ultimate degree. Replace man with machine. Subjugate him to it. Now, I couldn't agree to that. The object of the exercise is to drive me insane. How will you know when you've achieved it?